When I was writing this sermon, I began crafting something I wanted to go over well with folks. I had in my mind that I will tell a story about some of the layers of food justice, plan on pulling from some of the UU sources, and pointing out how food and feast have been present throughout religious communities for as long as history tells us. Some examples would be Adam and Eve, kicked out of the Garden of Eden for eating an apple. A tale of Jesus, feeding 5,000 from 5 loaves and 2 fish. Day of the Dead, where people place foods on altars for their beloveds who have passed. Rosh Hashanah, apples dipped in honey to celebrate the new year. The Muslim festival of sacrifice, where the sacrifice refers to an animal in remembrance of the story of Ibrahim and his son Ismail. How mooncakes are the landmark food for the Mid-Autumn Festival, a cultural and religious holiday celebrated during the fall harvest. And I'm sure there's food traditions among the native Hawaiian culture that someone can share with me afterward. But in my dreams, my ancestors came to me and told me I needed to go deeper. So I planned on weaving those above with a story from a local city of mine called El Cajon, and their ban on feeding the homeless from October 2017 to January 2018. How a group of activists came together, dubbed themselves Break the Ban, and shared food in public spaces until they were cited. In comparison, the city of El Cajon flexed its muscle with a $1,000 fine and even potential jail time for breaking the ban. And it wasn't until January 2018 that that group was finally cited. And why that mattered is that it could now be challenged in court, because the following week, the ban was lifted. Still, my ancestors returned to my dreams and said to me to go deeper. So I began writing about food justice as a call to action after the immigrant raids in chicken processing plants. In raids held on August 7th, 2019, agents arrested 680 immigrant workers from 7 different chicken processing plants in central Mississippi, the largest single state immigration enforcement operation in US history. I wanted to call your spirits to this piece because before these raids, those workers were union organizing for better working conditions and higher wages. As things were looking to be in the hands of the workers, the owners, Koch Foods, quietly requested a raid at their plants. I wanted to weave in how the fight for unions is part of food justice. Again, my ancestors came to me and told me I needed to go deeper. And so I asked them, how can I go deeper? The next day, I started writing about wages for migrant farm workers. In September 2020, the US Department of Ag announced that it no longer intends to collect data on the money paid to those who keep Americans fed. Today's migrant farm workers make, on average, just under $13 an hour, and that rate varies by region. By failing to conduct its traditional ag labor survey, workers could be paid just the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour. I wanted to speak how the fight for living wages is built into food justice. I was weary of my impending dreams that night. And of course, they came back and told me, don't craft something you think others want to hear. Tell your food and food justice story. So similar to that video we just watched, where the last commentator mentions, it's about access to food, but it's also an access to the story around food, and then the implications of that story around the community that is telling it. My ancestors were moving me to share my story with you, and by sharing it, I'd be including how food justice affects them. And let me just say, when you have dreams like that and your ancestors are coming to you, it's best to just listen. Just embrace it and listen to them. So here's the journey. Food in my family has generational trauma. I have a Mexican background. Most of the elders in my family were migrant farm workers at some point in their lives, some of whom still are. Many of them were also immigrants. All of my grandparents worked in the fields or packing plants at one period or another. My mom and stepdad used to work the fields as children. They were as young as 8 years old, working out in the fields with their parents. They worked hard to get out of that industry as they grew up because they didn't want their children to work in the fields. They didn't want me to work in the fields. I remember visiting my Tata Biko in the fields while he was working the tractors. I know part of those visits were because my parents never wanted us to forget where we came from and how much we need to take advantage of the opportunities we are given right now. Food in my family has love baked into the recipe. Some of the most cherished memories I carry with my family revolve around meal times. From the conversations while making food to the stories that come forth while sitting around the dinner table. I also grew up with a large family. I have 23 aunts and uncles. I have 6 siblings and way too many cousins to list. All of that means that I experienced a lot of birthday celebrations throughout the year with a lot of food. Food in my family meant sharing with others. Giving to those who were experiencing food insecurity was important to us. We always invited others to join us. There was always extra seats, extra plates, and great food to be shared. Because we considered food, as specifically mealtime, a sacred space, and we were called to share that with others. And while I got all these experiences with my family, I have to admit ignorance when it came to knowing about the larger umbrella of food justice. I'm going on 36 years old, and up until about 11 years ago, I never even knew it was a thing. I first learned the term food justice after an experience with my UU congregation. I knew about food insecurity and lumped it in with that. And while I wasn't entirely wrong with one of the aspects of food justice, that was very far from a proper definition. I had to learn the hard way by messing up a lot. While I can't tell you every aspect of my messing up journey, I want to tell you the very first time I got it majorly wrong, because that's the one that vividly sticks in my mind. I volunteered to host a UU Young Adult group meeting at my congregation. I was excited to host, and even the topic was going to be about food, genetically modified food, to be specific. And that's a totally other sermon right there. I got a nice variety of light and heavy snacks and refreshments, and was pretty confident in providing a praiseworthy spread of food for everyone at that meeting. And then it happened. Someone asked if there was anything gluten-free. Another asked what was vegetarian. A third asked what were the vegan options. Then someone inquired about something dairy-free to eat with the crackers besides meat. A few things fit into some of those asks, but not all. The truth is, I, a carnivore with no dietary restrictions, had bought food I liked, as I planned on taking home any and all leftovers. I felt pretty terrible and small in that moment. Here I was just a few short weeks into finding this group, and I did this with food. I had missed the mark on many of the group's dietary needs. It didn't even cross my mind to ask about those things. I had no clue what to do other than to offer my apology. Afterward, I went home embarrassed and felt I had disrespected some of the folks for not being as inclusive with them as I had been with me. So I started researching all those things. I was determined to expand and learn more so I didn't make a mistake around food again. Side note, I did make more mistakes, a lot more mistakes. And after each time, I made sure to do better. I like to call it my time with the fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning around food justice. My relationship with understanding food justice began to evolve through this, and it still is. As the years have gone by, I have learned more about vegetarians, vegans, gluten-free, keto, plant-based diets, organic, ethically sourced foods, free range, farm to table, food allergies, food sensitivities, fair trade, and so much more. It's really a mouthful once you put all those things together in in one sentence, yeah. I even gave up sugar at one point to see how much of it was incorporated into our processed foods. The answer is it's incorporated into a lot of things if you want to give up sugar. I realized that a food war was occurring, with many battles simultaneously happening. From bans on feeding the homeless, raids on immigrants trying to form unions at food processing plants, the fight for wages for migrant farm workers, to food deserts where options are limited, to owning that the pesticides we must diligently wash off as working consumers are most definitely dangerous to those working in the fields. And honestly, just access to affordable, healthy food options and possibilities, because everyone deserves that right. And I want to wade into the new uplifting possibilities part. I heard someone giving a talk about food get asked if they were an optimist for the future of food justice. They said, "No, I'm not an optimist." And that's because I'm a possibilist. I believe in the active possibilities we can create around food justice instead of remaining in an inactive, optimistic state. I like to say that I too consider myself a possibilist, and I hope you'll join me as well. One way I've done this is by being proactive in my practices. I have multiple options for various dietary needs whenever I host events. And sometimes when I'm not hosting, if I know the person who is hosting isn't as active in that area. It's become important to me to make shared spaces more welcoming, where everyone can find acceptance and belonging, especially at the root level of the food being provided. And I have to say, I'm not a vegan or vegetarian, and I currently do not have any dietary restrictions, but now I do my best to make better choices in my daily meals, with less focus on meat, an increase in veggies, and generally a wider, healthier variety. I shop at farmers markets when I'm able, buy fair trade as available, back food unions, be in solidarity with immigrant farm worker groups, support small food businesses, and have a better understanding of where my foods come from. And I still don't get it right all the time, but I'm getting better. I used to be intimidated by the numerous onion layers involved in food justice. Yet learning in small doses has helped me develop tools for long-haul work. And I know it also works for others. So let's be committed to being possibilists together and do small things with great love, because that is how we'll make a big difference. Amen, and blessed be.